we'll get started. So welcome everyone on behalf of the National Center on Restorative Justice. I want to welcome you to today's webinar on healing and accountability through way of victim offender dialogue, which is a facilitated process that's used in the criminal legal system. We'll get to hear from a wonderful group of panelists on the topic today. So remember to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions to the group. By the way, my name is Avery Arrington. I use she and her pronouns. I'm one of the assistant directors at the National Center on Restorative Justice, which has brought you this year's webinar series that focuses on restorative justice content within the criminal legal system. Before I turn things over to today's moderator, I want to offer a special thanks to the National Center's federal funding partners, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, under the U.S. Office of Justice Programs, and our center's additional partners, host institution, Vermont and Law Graduate School, the University of San Diego, and the University of Vermont, and their commitment to improving policy and practice through restorative justice research, public education, and higher education. We're halfway through Restorative Justice Month. We have more to offer in terms of events and information. So when you feel free and get the time, we encourage you to please visit our website at ncorj.org/RJ Month 2023. Check out some of the things we're offering within research and education. And once again, I always like to remind folks that these resources are free of charge. I'll now turn things over to today's discussion over to our moderator, Tomei Varlak-Butler, a restorative equity educator and executive coach with a deep commitment and personal mission for healing and justice. Thank you, Tomei, and to all of our panelists today for your willingness to participate.
Thank you so much, Avery. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are hailing in from today. I just want to say thank you for being here, and I'm honored to be your host today. As we gather in this virtual space, we stand at the crossroads of healing and accountability, two pillars that not only anchor our dialogue for today, but also is the foundation of restorative justice practices, right? And this webinar is a unique convergence of a point for system actors and community members alike, all of whom share a commitment to understanding and advancing the practice of restorative justice. We are here today to delve into the intricate dynamics of victor-offender dialogue and to explore the transformative power it holds in alignment with restorative justice. Our esteemed panelists, each with their own profound experiences in this field, will shed light on the critical role of restorative justice practices. They will offer us a window into the delicate yet impactful journey of bringing together harmed individuals and responsible parties, fostering a space where healing and accountability can coexist and thrive. Throughout this session, our presenters will share not only key recommendations, but also address the challenges encountered during the implementation of restorative justice practices. So welcome again to our Healing and Accountability Dialogue in the Criminal Legal System webinar. And I'll just give you a quick synopsis of our panelists. We have Suzanne, who presently serves on the Restorative Justice Advisory to California Catholic Conference, and she is going to tell you more about herself. I do not want to introduce them. I want you to look at the bios at another time because I really want us to get into the crux of this dialogue because it's really a serious conversation that we need to have. And Erica Sasson, she's going to tell you a lot about her that you can read about as well. In her work that she does with violent intervention programs in New York City, and also being a recipient of the David Prize. We have Kevin from the AMISA Collective. He's a facilitator for VOD, Victim Offender Dialogue. He's amazing, and you'll hear more about him and his work. He's a father of 3, grandfather to 4 grandchildren. I like to bring in the human in the room. Also, we have Rebecca. And Rebecca also will introduce herself to you and tell a little bit more about what she does and why she is here. But before we move forward, I want to address and demystify a couple of common misperceptions about restorative justice. One, that it's a soft science, and it's not. It really takes courage, and it's hard for people to show up as their authentic self when they have caused harm or experienced harm. And the second thing that I hear a lot of that is restorative justice is a tool. Restorative justice is not a tool that we pick up and put down. Restorative justice is a way of being that's rooted in indigenous processes and cultures that brings us back to the core of who we are at our humanity. So that not only do we honor our own humanity, but we honor the humanity of the person before us. It's about connecting to the human in the room. So with that, I am going to turn this over and begin with Rebecca to introduce yourself. I ask all the panelists to introduce yourself, share one brief sentence about yourself and 2 things about your work. And I'll begin with you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Tomei. My name is Rebecca Weicker, and I am the co-director of the MEND Collaborative, MEND, and we are a restorative justice organization that facilitates processes between survivors and people who've caused harm. One of the unique things about our organization and our model is that everyone who works with us is either a survivor of harm and or somebody who has been incarcerated for being responsible for harm. And I'll also just say that I am a survivor myself. My oldest sister was a victim of homicide. I'm grateful to be here and happy to share more as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going along as if I'm in a circle looking at my screen, and I see Erica next, followed by Kevin and then Suzanne.
Hi, my name is Erica Sasson. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks, Tomei, for that beautiful introduction. I am a practitioner. I'm an attorney. I work on specific cases that I think are going to shift the ways that either systems or in communities we look at a certain kind of harm. So I'm interested always in working on harm that maybe hasn't been done before in this jurisdiction or would help our system retreat. So, I look specifically at, right now I'm focused on homicide and domestic violence and sexual violence because we just don't see enough interventions on those kinds of harms here in New York City. I work often at, separate from my California colleagues here, I work more often at the front end. So either before charges are laid or after charges are laid, but not in that post conviction space that we will hear a little bit about today. And I guess also just to share that I grew up in Canada. I moved here about 14 years ago. And I'm also a mom and a stepmom, and that animates a lot of my work. And that's it. Thank you.
And now we're going to Kevin.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. So, yeah, this work for me started via an invitation and has continued to be a series of invitations about what it really means to be in touch with my own humanity through this work of victim offender dialogues. 2 things about my work that I would say would bring up is, yeah, it's not work. I think something that Tomei said earlier about it just being a way of living, a way of life, and the hard work of really incorporating that into my life. Again, we've all caused harm or experienced it, so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, this makes sense for me. It's how I learned about it. It just seemed like a practical way to move through space and be in contact with other humans. So there it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Suzanne.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Newhouse, and I'm calling in from California as well. I came into this work, which I also has evolved into a calling for me, in large part because I experienced the murder of my brother as well, and consider myself a survivor. And I do recognize that while I and my family have been harmed, I have no doubt that we too have caused harm. And from that place, I work very hard to connect with people from a place of compassion and a genuine sense of caring. And I brought that into my work in the criminal justice system for the state of California, beginning in the juvenile division and ending my career in the adult division. And early on, I was fortunate enough to start in the 80s when we were actually implementing more raw forms of restorative justice and victim-sensitive offender programming. And it was early in my career that I was trained in victim offender dialogue in the early 1900s, 1994 to be exact. And I began doing dialogues in the department and continued doing them until I retired in 2015, and then continued to do dialogues in retirement as well, and still have active cases on my docket. So that said, I now, as I shared, I worked as a peace officer in the correctional setting, and I now serve as a victim offender dialogue facilitator, and I teach in restorative justice in Santa Clara University's graduate program in pastoral ministries. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all for really centering us and sharing your work. And I just want to invite everyone who is watching to really partner with the power that you already possess. And if at any time you feel like you need to take care of yourself, I invite you to do that, especially if the conversation might become a little unsettling or discomfort, right? But we lean into that because there's no growth in comfort. However, you can do things like get you a glass of water, take your shoes off wherever you are, ground yourself. I just want to give you some techniques to a box breathing. If you feel yourself at all becoming overwhelmed, because we don't know who's in the space and where they are in their walk, right, in their journey. So I just want to make sure that you put that up front to take care of yourself. So to my wonderful panelists, I am going to begin with this first question is for Rebecca and Kevin. For you, Rebecca and Kevin, can you describe how victim offender dialogue works in your area, including the different stages such as pre-charge, diversion, embedded in courts, and post-conviction? And of course, after Rebecca and Kevin respond, if our other panelists want to chime in, you're welcome as well. Can you?
I'll start. We'll tag team.
Sure, sounds
okay.
good.
Okay. So just to also ground us in so I'm in California and have worked with Suzanne and Kevin in various ways. So just we're all part of the California wing of this. And in California, there's a process that is called victim offender dialogue that is done in collaboration and with referrals through the Office of Victim and Survivor Rights and Services through the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And that process is initiated by the victim survivor who requests to have a one-on-one meeting with the person who has caused harm. And the way that it works is that person, or sometimes there's more than one person, requests to have that dialogue. It gets referred to one of the people, either nonprofit organizations or facilitators in California. The work is not done directly by the Department of Corrections. It's done by community members who are facilitators. So it gets referred to us. And then we start with the survivor and find out what those needs are that the person has. We meet with them to understand what they're looking for out of this process. And when we have a good grounding in that, we meet with the person responsible and introduce the process, give a lot of detail about what it is, what it isn't, and let them know that it's voluntary, it's confidential, and it's not connected to parole or their prison journey. It's really separate from that. It's outside of those processes. And we're open to hearing a yes, a no, a maybe, or I'll see, whatever that happens to be. And then if they say yes, then the work begins. I'll turn it to you, Kevin, if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, since we work in the post-conviction space, I just want to be clear that I'm not in a position to comment on pre-charge or diversion or what's embedded in the court. So I just want to make that clear. Maybe Erica can chime in on some of that. But to the point Rebecca was making, just kind of walking through the process of actually moving into a victim offender dialogue when it's requested by a survivor. Just to add some nuance to that, I think that what I'm finding in my work is that for a survivor to step forward and to make this request, that there is a great deal of work that's already been put in. And that is something that really, in centering the survivor, that there's something to be said in that there's a lot of information that survivors have to really help us understand how this process really works and what it takes to actually even get to that place. On the other side, with the person inside being able to accept the invitation, there's a lot of work that has already gone into it. I can't measure that work, there's no quantification, but there's something that has been happening for them to even be able to receive this rare gift of accountability from the person they've harmed. So yeah, this work is extremely powerful. It's extremely powerful. The nuts and bolts of it are cool, but what happens when people come together to work out under a deeper understanding and move towards a healing process? That's where the magic is. That's where the alchemy is. Rebecca.
Thanks.
So let me jump in really quick, Rebecca, because Kevin, you talked about the magic. I don't want to assume that we all know what that magic is. So can you just give us an example of the magic as you just said it? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's that it's that innate characteristic that we all as humans have when we're able to create courageous space for ourselves and to hold that for someone else, whether that person has harmed me or I've harmed them, or I'm sitting in for one of those individuals in this conversation. There's something that happens. And because the victim offender dialogue process, it's a slow walk. It's a slow walk to understanding. As facilitators, we are working, yes, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, they have their stuff. But there's something about the way we're able to work in the system here that is rare. It doesn't happen in Illinois in this way, right? So this ability to work slowly with people, both sides, and to have them talk about not only what they're seeking, but also what they're bringing. Like, I'm bringing my work to this conversation so that I can move forward, so that you can move forward, so that all the people who have been affected by this ripple effect can actually move forward. That's the magic.
Thank you.
The way I see it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And before we bring in Erica or Suzanne, I want to get back to Rebecca. She was starting a thought. Did you want to finish that thought, Rebecca?
Thanks. Very briefly, I'll just say that I saw in the chat that someone was asking how people find out about the process. And there's information on the Department of Corrections website. I'll just say that there's only not only about 20 to 30% of survivors of people are registered in California. So they might not even know about this project process. And the other thing is that, so one of the things that we're doing in California is trying to do outreach directly into the community with survivors, and then also with district attorneys' offices and public defenders to let people know that they can request this. A lot of our referrals actually come because we're working in the community and people find out about it through us, and then it gets routed back to us through the Department of Corrections.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Suzanne, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just briefly, it's wild to have been on the ground floor of bringing dialogue into California's correctional setting, and it's come a long way. It actually didn't formalize the program and put it into their policy and procedure until just after I retired. And interestingly enough, when they took a look at that, they used the same proposals that began being presented in the late 90s. So it's pretty exciting to see that they are gradually, they don't do anything fast, developing capacity and greater capacity to bring restorative programs into the setting. So it's exciting to hear where it is now and knowing from where it's come, because the reality is that the correctional setting is not designed to really create opportunities for healing and accountability. It's really designed to punish and to protect the public from the wrongdoers. And in so doing, I think that it causes great harm. It causes great harm.
Exactly. Thank you for that. We think about Fania Davis, who says that our justice system is one where they cause harm to people who cause harm to show that causing harm is the wrong thing to do, but yet they're causing harm. So thank you for that. Erica, did you want to respond to this question, or you're good? Okay. So I'm going to offer this next question and open it up for you. Can you share a personal or professional story that illustrates the impact of restorative justice in your work or life? And I would love to begin with you, Erica, to make sure we bring your voice in the room.
Thank you. I was thinking about this question the last few days. Really in speaking to those of you on the webinar right now who might be personally impacted by what's happening in the Middle East, or even just feeling the ripple of it. So first, just to say, I'm certainly feeling impacted and feeling the ripple, coming from a Jewish and Israeli family, and really devastated by the kind of violence that is happening right now. And I thought, so first of all, just my heart is with everyone who, is having a hard time right now, and hoping that you can take deep breaths. And I was thinking about the impact really that my restorative justice work has had personally for me as I move through this difficult moment. I have a close colleague, she just got her PhD, Dr. Lama Hassoun Ayub, and she was the research director of a restorative justice project that I did in schools in Brooklyn, trying to change the culture of those schools and reduce the suspensions. And I'll make this story brief. She's from Southern Lebanon, and again, my family's in Israel. And, as the news of this war broke out, we experienced, both of us, a lot of difficulties. And I guess what I wanted to share, and which I'm sharing with her permission, of course, is that we found a way, about not when things just broke out, but maybe 10 days later, to spend time listening to each other and really just making space for each other's experience of these events. And I think we both really credit, even though she's a researcher and I'm a practitioner, when we did that project, we used restorative justice principles together in our training, so that the research wasn't this, separate, only academic endeavor, but it was really part of our project. And we sat in circles together, and we really relied on that. And we have relied on that in these last few weeks to be able to just be together. And I think one of the misconceptions maybe about restorative justice is this idea, like you said, Tomei, that it's a soft science, that, we're all going to hold hands and run off into the sunset together. Everyone on this panel has worked in really horrific, complex harm. And you don't just get over that and kumbaya your way through that. But I think what this work can show you is that you can breathe through it, and you can hear through it. And I think that you can also see a way forward that you couldn't when you were kind of underneath the harm. And that's really, I think, what the work is trying to do, is just trying to like clear a little bit of the forest so that we can walk and see a path forward. And that's, I think, what I experience personally right now with Llama, as we make space for each other with our different backgrounds, to just hope and pray for, a better future. That's what I thought I would share. I'll pass to you, Suzanne. I don't know if you're next, but.
Suzanne, yes, bring your voice in. Rebecca and Kevin, I'm saving you for last.
Thank you. I too gave a lot of thought to this question and really how I wanted to share a response. As I shared, I do have my own experience navigating life after my brother's death, and really, I entered the department 8 months after he was killed in a crime that remains unsolved, and I knew that if I was going to take a position in corrections, that I needed to show up with my clientele. Frankly, I worked in the juvenile setting when I first began my career, and for most of it, actually, that I needed to show up from a place of compassion, from a genuine place of caring for the individuals that I worked with. Because what I knew is that if I didn't care about them, they wouldn't be able to receive any direction, guidance, support, or counsel from me working with them. And that was very important to me. So it began for me an intentional journey through my own grief, through my own bitterness, through my own rage, through my own, all those things that come into that space and do come back to revisit on occasion. So I needed to make sure that I had the support systems in place and had begun that journey and was aware of that. To now really recognizing that my professional work has very much began in that place. And the story that I want to share as it relates to my work was early in my career. I was not in institutions for very long. I ended up in field parole within 2 years. And one of the very first young men that I worked with had committed an attempted murder when he was 15 years old. And when he came out to parole at 23 years old, he had an associate's degree. He had graduated from high school. He was hitting the floor running. And his institutional program was actually quite impressive. His crime involved was a gang-related dispute in which he shot another young man whom he did not know well, but who was in a rival gang, and the two were basically from the same area. Both were Vietnamese. And when he presented in my room, the first thing he said is that I have an associate's degree. My plan is to go to college, and I've been accepted at. That's how we began the conversation. And I was, of course, fully in support of that. And within the first few days of continuing his college, he went into the work study program on campus because he wanted to get a job. And he identified a card on the wall that was asking for someone who could serve as a mentor, tutor, and reader for someone whose disabilities necessitated some kind of assistance. He took that down, and lo and behold, who did he meet the following day in a coffee shop on campus? But the young man that he shot, who was in a wheelchair and had lost most of his vision, which began In fact, what I found out was not even at the end of that day when he and his father entered my office, having already scheduled a meeting for that night between the parents, the young men, and me. And this is my first time finding out about all of the above, to figure out how to make that happen, because immediately they recognized an accountability, an obligation. This young man couldn't undo what he had already done, but he wanted to do everything he could to make right, to the extent that he could, the damage that he had caused. And it was in that interaction, it was meeting with those folks, and then of course dealing with all the adversarial processes that I had to navigate in the department for which I worked, around his violating his terms and conditions of parole because he had contact with the victim, and actually getting that condition removed so that these two could develop what has become a lifelong friendship. And while they didn't participate in a formal dialogue, what I witnessed was the tremendous capacity for human beings to transform their lives into something good. And that's what they recognized in each other. And for me, that was restorative justice, and right in front of my eyes. And it became very important to me to work with the department, work in the department, in a way that brought like opportunities to people who had been impacted by harm on both sides, which I had begun in the prior to entering the field. And interestingly enough, the young man responsible is now a practicing neurosurgeon. I wonder why. Don't have to wonder. And both are happy and have families, and to be continued.
Thank you so much for that sharing, Suzanne, excuse me. Kevin, we are going to come to you now.
Yeah, I want to say I appreciate the shares from my fellow panelists here. And what kept coming up for me is the intimacy of this work, and how if I don't want to get in there with it, if I don't bear myself in that space, if I don't open myself up in that space, my effectiveness is diminished. But to be able to do that and to expose myself to these stories, because there's harm built in these stories. Just the hearing of the stories has an effect. And I'll make it personal, it has an effect on me. When I hear people share their stories and share these great harms they've sustained or actually placed on others, I can't help but to be there with them. So I've been a real estate broker for 20 years. And I came into this work because I had the capacity to be involved. Like I said, there was an invitation. I control my own schedule. Hey, I want to do something in the community. I want to help some people out, maybe someone who is less fortunate than me. So I did the food bank stuff, and done some community work, helping people fix their houses and clean their yard, that kind of stuff. But there was something that just wasn't happening with it. It was just that it just felt performative. So when I was invited inside to sit with the men, I was told that they'd be happy to see me, which was kind of strange for me to hear that. Sit with a group of men, happy to see me. What does that mean? I don't know that. But I took the invitation, I accepted it, and I went and I saw something that I'd never seen before. I saw men caring for each other. So as a father and a grandfather, to see all of that, the level of intimacy that they were willing to share with each other, to help each other, I needed some of that. I wanted to be close to that. I wanted to see that happening. I wanted to know what that was about. So I started going inside on a weekly basis. And in this examination of harm and people sharing the harm that they've committed and the harm they've sustained, it started changing me. It started changing how I was seeing my work. For example, as a real estate broker, the question that they hit me with was, so Kevin, thanks for coming in. It's good that you come in and we really appreciate you. But have you examined the harm that's built into the work that you do as a real estate professional?
Mm.
It blew my mind because I was like, what do you mean? I'm done. I'm doing my job. I'm doing my work. Don't check me. Y'all are in prison. I'm not. That was my attitude. But when I had to sit with it and had to think, it's like, whoa, this is a day-to-day thing. And it forced me to start examining just, the harsh word I had for the person who cut me off. The beef that I, still having with my mom because she didn't do something that I wanted her to do. I'm 60 years old. It's interesting when you start examining, when I started examining these points of pressure for me, that the men's voices were the ones that were coming into my head. It's like, you got to look at this. You got to look at this. And you got to look at this because you've seen us do it and you can do it. So the power of this work, I can talk about the dialogues I've sat in. I can talk about the men I've sat with, whatever. What I've received from it is immense. The gifts that I continue to receive from being involved in this work go so far beyond, telling the story of the victim offender dialogue. It just goes everywhere with me. So that's the power of this work for me. This is what I've found. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for that. I just wanted to note something that first, before I respond to some things that you said that really just struck me. I want to acknowledge the Q&A and let you all know that we are going to respond to your questions. We have some time set aside at the end, and we might just bake it into the questions that we have. Also, we want to respond to the needs that was raised up in the Q&A. For accessibility purposes, we will drop in the questions because we care about you, right? That's what this work is, which brings me to something that you said when you talked about the intimacy of this work, Kevin, and how the effectiveness is diminished when we don't bring out our full selves into the space, right? And one of the things that I do as a restorative justice practitioner, facilitator, listen, the one thing I believe in is making sure that I don't come into a space and assume I'm the expert over somebody else's life, right? I'm the expert in the content that I might share, but only each person is an expert in themselves. And I think when we kind of come from that place, then we can really connect to one another's humanity. Because for me, it's not just about doing the work. It's about being the work. Because if we can be the work, then it makes the work. When you talk about vicarious trauma, listening, we're all impacted by these stories, and even how it might bring up some things from our own history with trauma. It's important for us to really acknowledge just the vulnerability that adds to it, right? It's like all of these, it's just the making of humanity. Just be you and be your authentic self, right? That's what we're called to do. So that's something that really struck me. And I definitely want to stay with you, Kevin, for the next question, to start us off with the next question, which is really talking about what are some of the challenges you've encountered while implementing victim offender dialogue, and how have you addressed these challenges if you've come across them?
That's actually just an extension of what I was saying earlier. The work, it's so cool to be able to acknowledge mentors and, speak to the things that they've shared. And one of the things that one of my mentors shared was, this ain't about facilitating anybody. This is about facilitating you. and really being able to manage what comes up in you.
That's it.
That's it. That's it.
That's it. That's the crux of it. Thank you for saying that it's really about, before we try to sit and facilitate someone else, before we try to get them to open up to us, have we opened up to ourselves? Have we opened up to face the reality about who we are, our lived experiences, our ancestral histories that influence the way we view the world and engage and interact with people? Are we really looking at those things? So I think that's just powerful that you brought it up, and I hope I didn't interrupt your thought. So let me just pass it back to see if you had anything else to offer us before we move on.
That was it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was powerful. So we're going to work backwards and go to Erica, Suzanne, and Rebecca.
On the challenges for implementing VOD?
Yes.
Why don't I pass that one to Rebecca and Suzanne to focus on VODs? I've done a version of VODs, but not in the post-conviction space. So I'll pass it to you, Rebecca, if that's good for you.
Sure. I think I'm really echoing what Kevin said. I mean, I think about challenges really as there's the external challenges, which are always going to be there, which is dealing with systems that are not set up to, I mean, the purpose of VOD is to meet needs that aren't already being met that can't be met within the criminal legal system. It's not designed to do that. It's designed to convict and punish. And there's so many needs that survivors have, and people who've caused harm that aren't addressed by that system. So systems are built to power and control. There's systemic issues. There's, all the things that are wrong in our society are also in those systems in terms of racism and oppression and power over strategies. And so you see that come up. And so there's day-to-day challenges. I could always, any given day, I could tell you, like this happened and we had trouble with this clearance and we had trouble with this, because those systems, there's wonderful people working within these systems, but the systems themselves are structured in a way to not create healing and accountability. That's not their purpose. We need to do the work to address those things. And in the end, when we're showing up in these spaces, it really is what Kevin said, which is, how am I addressing, first of all, owning, being transparent about my own biases, the way that I show up in a space. So am I really going to have a place of empathy and groundedness to receive what the survivor is sharing and to receive what the person responsible is sharing, and get out of the way. The more I do this work, the less I talk in dialogue. I figured that out, that it's really, we facilitate, we don't teach, we don't control, we don't guide even. We really create the preparation and support and autonomy of survivors and people responsible is key. And if we have supported them, in the way that in the way that is supportive, then we can get out of the way and let them do what they know and need how to do.
Thank you, Rebecca. Suzanne, if you want to add to it, you can. If you feel like your colleagues have covered it, then we can move on.
I'll just add really briefly, and I so appreciate what each of you have said in this space. It's we have systems and we have programs and we have rules and we have order, and this work requires a tremendous amount of working in the gray and risk-taking, and it's not about the program. It's just not about the program. You can continue to create new programs, and what people will take away from the opportunities that they have is how people showed up for them in a given space. And I know that as a facilitator, that's what my focus is. How am I going to show up in this space to make it a space where they can develop their own capacity to heal and transform their own lives. It's not about me doing that for them or telling them what that's going to look like or how to get to that. It's not for me to judge the decisions they've made, but it is for me to basically determine the answer to two questions. And one is, do I believe that these parties can come together with no intention to cause harm? And two, do I believe it will be of benefit to each party to do so? And then I get out of the way. And like Rebecca, at the time of dialogue, I very rarely say a thing. Sometimes I don't even start the space. I'm not the one that requested the dialogue. Really, the only time I start the space is if the level of emotion coming into the space, which is when we often experience to be at its highest, they need something to help break the ice. But most often, the person that requested that meeting is prepared to do just that.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And thank you, Erica, for responding to Barbara in the Q&A. I appreciate you responding to her. And I echo what you shared, Erica, to Barbara as well. I do want to stay with you for this next question, Erica, because you said you're not in the post-conviction space, but so compared to traditional legal proceedings, how does restorative justice meet people's needs in a non-adversarial process?
Thanks. And I'll also just speak kind of more broadly about outside of the post-conviction space, because things are much different in the either pre-charge or post-charge, pre-plea, post-plea, pre-sentence, that whole kind of timeline in which the state is holding your liberty at stake. Any kind of restorative justice process that you do has that sitting there, has the state's interest to prove a charge and possibly, impact your liberty. That's really in the room. So any restorative process. So what I think is so valuable about the VODs that have been described, and especially the way Rebecca described them right off the top, is that you're not dealing with that. There is no, there is no carrot and stick kind of aspect to it. Now, I do work sometimes in that space, either again, pre-charge, post-charge, pre-arrest, post-plea. And you do have to negotiate that massive piece of it. And there are things that you can do. And I guess I would kind of describe that as maybe it's the harm reduction space. It's certainly not a pure, amazing place to work in, because you do have this threat of coercion really in the room at all times. But there are things that you can do to at least shift the focus, at least reduce the amount of harm as much as possible. There are methods to kind of push that away. And I wanted to give people a couple of things to think about in that space. Number one, maybe the most important aspect of this is to make sure that the restorative justice is done independently, which means that there are systems players who maybe they're tired of being in that role, and they wish that they could connect deeper with people, and they hear about restorative justice, and you're a prosecutor and you think, well, I just want to have that conversation. And my best advice is to say that's not the conversation for you to have, because you can never erase the power dynamic that exists in your role. And so to me, the best thing you can do is retreat and give somebody independent from you the opportunity to facilitate that space for people who are in the line of fire of the justice system. So making it independent is a really important piece of any pre-charge or pre-plea space. The other really important thing is to make sure that there are confidentiality agreements, so if you're from a prosecutor's office, that you've signed a memorandum of understanding that says that you will not use any information gleaned in a restorative process to further any prosecution. That's incredibly important. I would add that it's not just admissions made in a restorative justice process, and that can actually be covered by legislation as well. But sometimes in my agreements, I ask that nothing admitted in a restorative justice process and the fact of a restorative justice process itself, because you can make inferences. If the idea in restorative justice is to acknowledge harm, if I sit in that seat, there's an inference that I've acknowledged harm, and it's true, I probably have. And so even just the fact of that process or anything said therein has to really be protected. I would say that anybody who sits in and then that kind of process should be signing some kind of consent that they really understand what they are doing, why they are doing it, and what these kinds of guidelines are around consent and confidentiality, that we're not posting things on social media, that we're not, right, like we're not drawing inferences by the fact of having done this. So there are some kinds of firewalls that you can do to protect your process as much as possible from either system overreach or coercion in that space. So that's kind of the beginning of what I would say, like how to beginning to do it, and making sure that people who hold power, like police officers, prosecutors, really any attorneys, judges, that they are not either reviewing the process or participating in the process unless they are willing to share the responsibility of the final outcome, which most systems players are not ready and willing to do. So unless they're saying, okay, in this process, we are all going to decide together what the outcome is, maybe that's a place in which I still probably wouldn't do it, but maybe that's a place where systems players could participate. But there really has to be a sharing of power. The purpose of this work is for the people closest to the harm to be able to determine for themselves how they want to move forward. And when we have a whole system that makes that decision for you, either they change how they do things, which I'm not sure we're at that place yet, or they have to retreat. And we have to have parallel processes and create as many firewalls as possible between the system's impact and then a community-based process. Now, you know, I've worked kind of connecting the two, or trying to kind of create a corridor between the two. And it is imperfect, but that's kind of some of the ways that you can think about it. But the most important thing, again, is just really trying to separate these processes and not mix it all up together. I'll stop there in case there's another question. I'm happy to answer it.
No, that's really good. And it's important the way you just laid it out and explained it. So we'll make sure that that goes in the chat, those 2 points, because they were put. I just wanted to check in to make sure no one wanted to respond to what Erica said before you actually respond to the prompt, to the question.
I can also talk about people's needs and what they get from it as compared to the legal system, if you'd like, Tomei. I realize I didn't really answer your question.
Sure. Go ahead, Erica. Thank you.
You know, what I've seen in restorative justice processes that happen, again, at that intersection of the justice system, is that, first of all, if you're a survivor of harm and you are asking yourself, is this going to happen to me again? Why did this happen to me? Do I have to worry every time I cross the street? Do I have to worry in my home? Oh, there's so many nagging questions that come from being the victim of interpersonal harm. And the system isn't focused on that. So the system is focused on determining, did something happen and what's the right punishment for it? But it's not interested in answering some of those questions and helping you design how you're going to move forward after that harm. And so what I've seen, the biggest takeaway I would say in terms of how a restorative justice process has helped survivors in ways the system hasn't, is to help them kind of take away the how would we describe it? Like, there's this giant narrative in your mind of what's happened and why it's happened, and it's always running through your mind all the time. And when you actually face the person who caused you harm, you're able to put some practical understanding, and then you can lay down that narrative and actually chart a path for yourself moving forward. And you can figure out, do I have to be afraid? Maybe you do, but actually maybe you don't. And so understanding what your future looks like, that's the thing that I've seen the most in a restorative process, is the ability to imagine the future, whereas the legal system is really keeping you focused on that past act. And if we want to move forward, then we're going to have to focus forward. I think for people who cause harm, I mean, the other thing is that there's people causing harm and experiencing harm all at the same time in our current system. And we kind of flatten that into really victim and offender. And that's a really flattened way to live, in whichever category you find yourself in. And so when we can soften those lines and understand that people are moving through all kinds of different harms, and we can validate all those harms, that's just another way that these restorative processes really help people not feel so gaslit by the labels that are out there. And just one more thing about our current system, which tells you really shouldn't be saying anything about what you did ever. And the first point of advice you'll ever get from a lawyer when your liberty is at stake is to be quiet and not say anything. And one of the best things that you can do is really talk about who you are and what you did, so that you can kind of be unburdened by that. And that's what I've seen for people who cause harm, is that on the social, spiritual, emotional levels, being able to say the things that happened to them and that they happened on others is incredibly freeing. And also, it also opens the path for what's ahead instead of getting stuck in what's behind. And we really can't do that if your liberty is at stake. You just can't. You cannot take that risk, especially because the conditions of our confinement are so inhumane and so degrading. It means that there's just no reason to take that risk. And I think that restorative justice gives you the framework to be able to take that risk and have a bit of a soft landing, so that it's worthwhile to share who you are and why.
That's so important. Thank you for sharing that, Erica. Suzanne, I'm going to pass to you, and then Rebecca.
Thank you so much. I appreciate so much of what you shared, Erica. And especially where you were talking about how the system is really focused on what happened, who did it, and how are we going to punish them. It is not focused on the needs of the human beings that have been impacted by the harm that has been caused. It is not focused on relationships at all. It is focused really on a process. It's and if the case, which does not happen in the majority of cases, actually goes to trial, it's more focused on a debate than it is on the needs of the people that have been impacted. So, I know that we don't have a lot of time, but I do need to share a story that really illustrates that. And it was when I was beginning the process of bringing or of even considering whether two parties could come together. And in this case, the daughter of a man deceased as a result of being killed by another young man had requested to meet with the person responsible. And when I first had conversation with the daughter, the requesting party, and in the state of California, it is required that the victim and or survivor requests the dialogue. That is the starting point. She explained everything about her experience sharing the victim impact statement in court in front of the responsible party. And throughout that statement that she made from her heart, in tears, and with a great deal of pain and anger, he never looked up. He never acknowledged her pain. And her takeaway from that space was, look at him. He doesn't even care what he's done. Fast forward 22 years later, she has asked to meet with him. On that day, she was 15, add 22 years. She had asked to meet with him because she had lived in terror of him escaping prison and killing her. When I met with him, the first thing he said, when I shared why I was there, which I share very quickly when I come into that space, there's no point in belaboring that, was her name, and he named her. And I wasn't even allowed to look at her. And then he proceeded to share everything she said in that statement and how he had been hoping for an opportunity to meet with her. So this is about truth-telling. This is about healing relationships. This is about the individuals, the human beings impacted. And it's rooted in not only in relationship, but in the belief that human beings have the capacity to grow and change and to get better. They can't undo what's happened, but they can get whole. They can get happy. They can see light. And oftentimes it requires coming face to face.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Suzanne. We're just gonna pivot for another question specifically for Rebecca. In the interest of time, because I do want to get these Q&A questions in, keep them coming, because even if we can't answer them today, our panelists will answer them and it will go out to you. So for you, Rebecca, what are some alternatives to victim offender dialogue?
So as we've heard, victim offender dialogue is requested in California by the survivor. And in many cases, survivors, there's never been anyone identified as the person responsible, or people, the person responsible isn't a good match. They don't have capacity, or the survivor doesn't want to meet directly with that person for whatever reasons. And on the other hand, people responsible, we believe at MEND that they are also deserve to have these kinds of experiences and encounters with survivors, and shouldn't have to wait for the person responsible who they harm to be able to have that dialogue with them. So we have what are called surrogate restorative dialogues or circles, where a survivor can come into a rehabilitative accountability victim impact program within a prison and share their story however they want to share that story, and then engage in a dialogue with the people in the circle. Usually it's anywhere from 15 to 20, 30 people in those circles, and survivors come in, they're prepared, they're accompanied before, during, and after with people who are facilitators and supporters to share their story, so that that they can have the benefit of being able to be heard, to have people apologize, to have people give them some sense of what happened, instead of what did you do, what happened to you that you were able to be in a situation where you could create this kind of harm, and get those questions answered, and then share about the impact and what their life has looked like for the last 10, 20, 30 years, however long it's been. And for the people responsible, they may never get to speak directly with the person who they harmed. And so they're carrying around often so much shame, so much guilt, and it gives them an opportunity to share their transformation, the work that they've been doing, to really engage directly with people who've been harmed. Now, I'll also say that from the work I've done inside prisons facilitating victim impact classes, it's rare that I meet people who are incarcerated who are not also survivors of harm. Mm-hmm. And so often their journey of exploration begins with understanding what happened to them, what the harm that they suffered in their community and their family looks like. And then I'll just say really briefly, yesterday I was in prison. We facilitated what we call days of healing, recognizing that truth, that there are survivors in the community and survivors who are incarcerated. And so we have these days where it's really all about healing and connecting and creating community. And we invite survivors from the community to have a day inside prison with incarcerated people who are also invited to show up as survivors of harm. We paint, we dance, we sing, we talk, we eat, we share about our common humanity and connect. And those are beautiful days because we see ourselves in each other. And so I think, to me, that's also restorative justice, which is acknowledging harm for whoever has been harmed and trying to create opportunities for repair and healing. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. So again, in the interest of time, this question is specifically for you, Kevin. What happens in VOD? Improbable and miraculous things. What improbable and miraculous things happen in VOD?
That's a That's a big question. It's a really big question. Yeah, so man, there are so many things that happen, and I'll just reiterate this thing about what's happened inside of me, and just being in close proximity to people healing each other. It keeps whatever hope it is that I have alive, in humanity, and even in myself, to be able to see conflict in a different way, and hold conflict with the sensibility that this is only a request for more information. This is only a request to get closer to someone, to something, a feeling that has gone awry. It's just gone. It's gone to the left. So to see people walk themselves back from that, and in Suzanne's story a moment ago, and just there's so much that we have in common in these stories, and that's the other thing in the victim offender dialogues that always comes through, is what people share in common. Now, either where they came from, their life experiences, or even just the opposite side of the coin of abundance and lack, or a shared sensibility of faith, and understanding that, oh yeah, this could have been me. I very well could be sitting on the other side of this table having this conversation with someone else. So I think what feels so massively beautiful about it is that we all have access to this if we take the time, if we slow things down enough to just to consider someone else's opinion, and their not even their opinion, but consider their experience. Being culturally sensitive, and just looking in and going like, oh wow, I didn't experience that. However, I did experience this, and those feelings that they're describing. I know what that feels like, to be alone, to feel isolated, to feel pain that from grief and loss, and it's just our pain it's weird, and I hate saying I say this only because it's the only way I can say it. I wish I had a better way. Is that our pain connects us. It connects us to each other and helps us to understand each other. So I feel fortunate because I get to sit in these spaces all the time. I just sat in a space with Rebecca recently, where we got to sit with people we knew, and watch them work it out. And there's something precious about that. There's something beautiful about it, and it's something that, for me, I want to. All the guys I've ever worked with inside, and I say the guys, I know the women do the work, but I've worked with men predominantly, and all of them want to go back to where they came from with constructive energies versus destructive energies, to bring love into a place where they were terrorizing. Every single one of them, not one, I don't care where they are in their journey, not one of them says, I can't wait to get back and do this again. That's what I'm experiencing. That's what's miraculous about it. So yeah, there it is. I hope that works.
That was good. I mean, it's the truth, right? I love how you brought in love, right? We need to bring in love in these spaces. And I thank you all for this work. I'm going to turn it over in a minute to Avery so we can get to the Q&A. But I just want to say that this work is so important to me because there's a narrative that exists in the world. And that narrative is that harm people, hurt people, right? And sometimes it's almost used as a defense or a justification. And what I'm on a mission to do in this world is to change that narrative. And that's what it sounds like you all are doing in the different spaces you encounter, because the narrative that I want to see happen is not that hurt people, but hurt people get help, hurt people get support, hurt people get held, and hurt people heal. So with that, before I turn it over, I just want to ask the four of you really quick, what is one thing you just want to share that I didn't offer to you through a question? One short sentence of something you want to share. So let's go, Kevin, Suzanne, Rebecca, and Erica.
This work is for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's for everyone. It's accessible to everyone. Step into it.
Yeah. Ditto. And we've heard so many times hurt people, and what we know to be true is that healed people heal people.
Say that it doesn't really take very much to transformation can happen at any time, and healing can happen at any time.
Just that I think we want to soften the lines between us a little bit. It's been a very hard time out there, and it's a lot of negativity. And I just appreciate the National Center for hosting this conversation, because I think, Kevin, what you said just about we feel really isolated in our pain, and if we can just talk about it a little bit more, we'll soften those lines between us, is what I would say.
Thank you. With that, I am passing it over to you, Avery.
Thank you all so much. Probably can speak for a lot of the attendees, and just, wow, incredible offering, just taking the time today. And you're right, Erica, we don't talk about this a lot. So I really appreciate your willingness, all of you, to take time to really dive in today. I'm going to try as best as I can, because I love keeping folks, I love, honoring time and saying what we said we were going to end, which is the 30-minute mark, wherever you are after the hour. So I'm going to try to condense. There were some questions that were answered within a lot of your responses, but I will quickly go through some of them. And there's some questions that can be answered through just some resources that I'm about to plug in through the chat. So our first question was about, I have this academic knowledge, but I need some practitioner knowledge. So where can I get this? I'm in a certain location in the Northeast or whatever. So I'm plugging in right now a map for everyone. If you visit NACRJ, that's the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, they've partnered with the National Center to kind of serve as this hub of resources to say, hey, there's literally a map. You can type in your state and it will pull up. And now this map is live and it's being created in real time. So the more information we get about community-based organizations, system, or all types of information regarding restorative justice is there. So please visit that map to look up your area of where restorative justice work is happening in your region. So that's one of the questions. There was a couple questions that were answered through responses about, particularly Erica and Rebecca talked about this. What are some of the different processes that can happen if folks aren't open to the process? You talked about more about that surrogacy process that happens. Rebecca, you also mentioned about how survivors, a lot of folks don't even know this is an option, but going through a website and following that process. And by the way, I hope you panelists are all open to folks reaching out to you. If you don't mind me sharing your contact information, that was also a request that came through the Q&A, just to continue this conversation and maybe some resources or questions they may have. There is a question specifically about evidence-based protocol to evaluate the potential for re-traumatization for those who have been harmed. So they're not, disassociating during a dialogue, the potential of reharming. Can anyone speak to that particularly? Rebecca, I see your hand raised.
I was going back a little bit. Not every state in the United States has this, like there are states that don't have the option of victim offender dialogue. And so there might be survivors like in Michigan, or there's different states where it's just not an option. So I would say if you're from one of those states, there's a lot of work to do to try to get that up and running. With re-traumatization, I mean, I think it's something that we think very deeply about, is how we support survivors and incarcerated people, especially because I think in both cases, people have limited resources. Often people who are survivors, that's part of the impact of being a survivor, and people who are incarcerated have very limited resources about support in terms of mental health. And I also believe that people are resilient, and people can make choices for themselves. And so we just need to help people identify what are their resources and make sure that they're well resourced, and trust them, and just be as responsible as we can be in respecting their process and supporting them.
I just add to that because I really appreciate that. Would just say, make sure you're really being clear with consent and in an informed and ongoing way. And so for me, that means, the day before we're going to have a dialogue. Do you still want to do this? We don't have to do this tomorrow. That's not, there's no, until we walk into the room, and then when we walk into the room, you can also say, you know what, I thought this was for me and it's not for me. And building that trust with people so that they know, especially if you're facilitating this, and this goes back to my answer about why systems people shouldn't be running these things. They have an agenda to get an outcome. And when you're facilitating, your only agenda is to get the people, kind of the way Suzanne described this earlier, that they're going to talk for themselves, they're going to do what they want for themselves. You really do want to facilitate it enough to get out of the way. And if you have the agenda that you have to have this dialogue happen for your funding or for your constituents or whatever kind of other external reason, then you would be potentially subtly coercing people into doing this, which is, I'm sure I can speak for everyone on the panel that would be our absolute last desire, is to never kind of force this on anyone. So I would say, I don't know about you necessarily need protocols. I agree with Rebecca. Obviously you want to inquire about victimization and re-traumatization, and inquire about, have an inquiry into this, and ultimately it's their decision, and just make sure that you're really leaning into informed, meaningful, ongoing consent.
Adding to that, Erica, thank you too, this is the reason why it's so important to get close to this work. The quantifying of numbers and all that, and research, that's so necessary. Don't get me wrong, it's so necessary. But once you sit close, in close proximity to a process such as the victim offender dialogue, you get it. You get it, you understand it. And also too, being close to the process and the preparation, as Erica said. This is about rebalancing a power dynamic. A survivor has not had any say-so in how anything goes. Once this thing happens, it's all over. No more power. You are off to the side. The system pushes you to the side. So by centering the survivors and walking them through to this place of confidence and empowerment, that, hey, I really have some say-so on how this process goes. I may not have any control over anything else in my life, but I'm controlling this and I'm good. That's how you quantify this information. I hope that's helpful.
And if I may really quickly, there is a big difference between a process that becomes a part of the judicial process or the court process. And for those of us in California, these dialogues all happen post adjudication or conviction. And so that's a very clear distinction. And even in that space, we spend a great deal of time, and it varies. I've brought cases in 3 months, I've brought cases in 3 years, it just varies. But we spend a great deal of time going over those things and reminding people that they are each in charge of whether or not they want to continue this process. And that's super important, that they not feel coerced, forced, obligated. I mean, even as it relates to me in this space as a peace officer. Now, granted, I did not facilitate cases. Well, that's not entirely true, but formally facilitate cases. Being the parole agent of one of my clientele. But it becomes really, really, really important that I know that they're answering those questions for themselves, that they've identified their expectations, that we've gone over what would happen if those expectations are not met. That basically we are helping them create the capacity for a successful dialogue to take place. And by and large, I think we can all agree that they're successful as measured by the people that came into that space to come together in the spirit of healing post adjudication, post conviction.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. This was a comment that was submitted, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, folks. How can healthcare providers be involved in restorative justice initiatives? Can this sort of partnership between medical and legal help bridge the access to justice gap for patients in need of civil legal services? The first thing that pops in my mind, I think of a good colleague that's on the National Center team. She's a researcher. She comes from a healthcare background, but she says all the time that, restorative justice is a public health issue, right? When we're talking about elements of community, talking about healing, like this is something that I believe that can hopefully easily be brought into from a healthcare perspective. And stay tuned, because I'm thinking like maybe we do need to do a webinar on this, and like mental health, medical care, like what are the intersections of that? So I'll go ahead, and it looks like Rebecca, your hand is up about this.
Well, I have a personal story about this. So a year and a half ago, my mom died, and the circumstances, she was in the ICU, and it was during COVID, and there were lots of difficult things about the situation, and the healthcare team was very stressed and had a difficult situation. And there were things that happened that I felt like should not have happened. And my background's actually in public health. And so I was like, you know what, I have unmet needs here. And luckily there was a team at the hospital that was willing to have that conversation with me, not the direct provider, but other people. And I was really grateful that I had some of these skills to basically be my own advocate and facilitator. And I just know, I just think about so many families in our communities who have, it's not being about blame, but being about unmet needs within so many different parts of the healthcare system, right? We know about the systemic inequalities and the way that impacts communities in terms of our healthcare system. And so I think this is a huge area where we could use not these tools, but this way of being, as you said, Tomei, to really address a lot of harm that has not been healed for people.
If I may also, Tomei, I have another story about that. I actually have a very close friend who works in a local hospital, and pretty much the majority of her job is dealing with folks that are at end of life. And so her contact with family members who are all in very different places is frequent. And as this when she began to really realize what that meant, because you really don't realize what it means until you're thrust in the middle of it, right? She was trying to figure out ways, because people would come in and basically say, if y'all can't calm down, you're going to have to leave, or this is the only person that has any power in this situation, and the rest of you need to stand down. And it became very adversarial and very uncomfortable. And so we began talking about ways that people could show up in that space to encourage the opportunity to have people be heard in like mini circles, basically, with someone who was capable of facilitating that. I don't know if they've yet created a formal process, but they've been very focused on how can we create a space for them with someone that's relatively neutral to facilitate a civil conversation with some agreements in an immediate situation, so that all that need to be present can be present and respectful, how we can just live together and recognize that we're all hurting in a given space.
Avery, I just wanted to jump in really quick. I'm sorry, Kevin, I just saw you unmuted as well. I just wanted to jump in because I don't do work specifically with victim offender dialogue, but I do a lot of healing circles and work with people impacted by child sexual abuse, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And I myself am a survivor. I'm actually most recently a fellow of the Futures Without Violence Survivor Leadership Cohort. And part of what they're doing with that cohort is bringing in survivor-informed care into the healthcare system. Because a lot of what happens is still this idea of we know what's best because we are the medical professionals. And so harm is still happening in that vein. So it is important that wherever we find ourselves in this work and engaging in survivors, especially when we're talking about not re-traumatizing, is just to ask what they need, right? To ask what they need and offer them to go as far as they feel called to go, because sometimes in these spaces, we're asking them specific details that they do not need to retell because of the harm. And sometimes it causes us to then engage in their lower brain because they've been hijacked, right? That trigger happens, now they're hijacked, and then we feel stuck as a facilitator or a human in the room trying to engage. So I really think it's important, again, bringing it back to censoring the needs of the person and not the needs of the organization or the facilitator and whatever agenda that we might have in alignment. So I'm going to stop there so you can bring your voice in, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tomei. Also, thank you, Suzanne. There's something that Suzanne, you said, it was a word that you use, and it always gets me, the term gatekeeper. And it's about access. And so who has access to, who has the authority to say who gets the assistance. And I think that in a healthcare setting, in a criminal justice setting, in a housing setting, okay, the questions that are asked are not about what has happened to you, what have you experienced, what is it that you need. It's like, what did you do? Why did you do that? And if we can get to a place of asking questions in a way that shows care and sensitivity to whatever that person's experience has been, without judgment, that whole judgment piece in there. And by bringing the system need into the conversation, judgment has to happen. There has to be a sorting, there have to be boxes checked. So yeah, I think that's part of the work.
One last one. Go ahead. Nope.
I'm sorry. If I could just address really quickly the whole issue of re-traumatizing victims. It takes a great deal of courage for a victim or survivor to request this type of process, to participate in this type of process. And one of the things that I have learned in my ongoing interactions with people who have been harmed is that they are not as fragile as people have decided they are in many cases. And oftentimes, for fear of re-traumatizing, we don't include them in decisions that are being made about how or whether they can be involved or know something, even if it's about the case that directly impacts their lives. So I think it's important that we do recognize that. Yes, being offender and victim sensitive is important, and being mindful to not cause harm and to write in front of ourselves on our mirrors, today do no harm, just to recognize that we are going to cause harm in this work. We do have to take risks in this work, but it's also important that we don't make decisions and eliminate the people most intimately impacted by harm from the conversations.
Avery, would I be able to say one thing on this?
Please. And Yes, please, 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 please.
Just to say, like, I just want to kind of identify the theory of change that's underneath all of this. We're talking a lot about putting people in the driver's seat, making sure they can make decisions. They're not too fragile to decide whether they want to have this kind of dialogue. I also just want to say from a theory of change of this work, you know, when you make decisions for people, they are not encouraged to take control over their lives, to make changes in their lives, to chart the direction forward. And our systems have taken a lot of that control away from people and have then said, why aren't you good at managing your own life? So it's like infantilizing your kids and then asking why they're still living in the basement, right? And it's like, we want people to be in control and to be able to manage conflict in their lives, repair harm that goes on in their community. We want this. We want this for ourselves. We want this for our families. We want this for our communities. And that's the theory of change to me underneath this work is when you empower people, you get stronger communities. You get stronger, you get then to Kevin's point about gatekeeping. You have tons of natural peacemakers in your community if you would just acknowledge the fact that they are there doling out this advice and this help all the time. And so a lot of this work and this kind of get yourself out of the way that I think a lot of the panelists have been talking about is about getting ourselves out of the way and acknowledging the people who are doing this for their own communities and elevating that and giving people access to this kind of transformation and self-governance and agency and strength. And I think that I just wanted to add that.
That was a great segue. There was, if you all have 2 minutes, there was a quick case study that I think it's all tying in exactly what you're saying, right? Truly putting survivor and victim needs at the forefront. And during this, there was a question that was submitted about a case study about what I'm calling a case study. There's a case where there seems like they're wrestling with taking the power out of our system actors' hands, because it looks like the outcome of a case for a harmed person was able to meet with the person who caused harm, who was an unsafe driver. They requested for them to give presentations about safe driving so that other drivers wouldn't do the same thing. But it seems that there's this other thing that feels unsatisfied. The harmed person nothing was asked of them to go to counseling or address, addiction services or anything that would prevent this particular person from doing this again. So this person's asking, like, how do we bring in these elements of the agreement while not pressuring participants? But I want you all to kind of answer, speaking to the needs of the person who was harmed. And it does look like they wanted them to give presentations. And is that enough? I know my answer, but I wanted to go ahead and put that case study out to you all. Not everybody speak at once. No, it's fine. I'm thinking of this particular video that we show from Sujatha about the Tinkerbell and the needs of folks who are harmed, but Kevin, you unmuted, so I'm gonna go to you.
Yeah, I don't have enough information, and it's not a cop out. It is really again, this whole process has to be slowed down, and it's really not about what I think. And in the seat that I'm in, I'm not the one to decide that, because if there was an agreement both parties came to, and there needed to be some revisiting of that agreement, somebody's got to speak up. And hopefully we set the stage for that, for the ability to come back and say, hey, there's more. I think there should be a little more discernment here. We need to tease some of this stuff out. So I don't think I have enough information.
Great.
I would maybe just say, I think if the question is, sometimes we're looking for our pound of flesh, and then we're replacing the inquiry into a pound of flesh into like a pound of agreements. And I think that when we're, if you want to shift a paradigm like this work is asking you to do, then that looking for enough, and I feel it too. Let me just say this too. I don't feel in judgment of that question, because I often have this question around accountability. Well, was it enough? Is it enough to sit and like, what is enough? And that that's a kind of deeper, maybe longer question, Avery, around, because it is a deep question. There is no going back from some of the harms we're talking about. These are irreparable harms, right? These are like terrifying things that's never going to be made kind of whole or better or anything like that. We're trying to shift and see what we can do to move forward. And so that checklist of, did I get enough for this? Again, it's just going to require a deeper conversation about what is it that you're looking for underneath that question? Are you trying to fulfill that like checklist or that pound of flesh, and you're just trying to replace using a restorative justice system instead of a retributive kind of punitive? We hear that all the time with sentences. Well, 15 years is not enough. And it's like, oh my God. Well, what is enough? And so I just would say it's a deeper question, and we can't just replace the question of the system into a restorative process and think that that's going to answer the accountability quandary.
And the reality is, I mean, kind of consider your own dinner table at Thanksgiving when things go awry. The next year, every person around the same dinner table is going to have seen it all differently. So enough for one person might not be enough for another person, which is why making sure that the people that are most directly and most intimately harmed or have caused harm or have been impacted by this incident have weigh in to the what next, right? And surprisingly, even people who have caused harm have some idea of what they need. And I think sometimes we forget that. They can be awfully hard on themselves when they're given the opportunity. So I agree. I wouldn't have enough information to answer a specific case.
Rebecca, I saw you on mute, but I just wanted to.
Well, it also just made me think, we've done quite a few DUI related cases. I think, a survivor need is often, I don't want this to happen to anyone else ever. I want safety for myself, for my community, for my family. And that's, such a deep need, and dialogue can help support that need. And we can't control what other people do. And that's part of, that's part of the process, is just holding that truth as well, that kind of equanimity that we may or may not have about our, we can ask and do all we can to create certain conditions for ourselves and the world, and then also we cannot control things. And so I think that's just a truth about harm and about healing.
Okay, 9 minutes over. You all have been fantastic. That concludes our webinar on healing and accountability by way of victim offender dialogue. For more information on Restorative Justice Month, please go to our website, ncorj.org. I believe we have one more webinar at the end of the month on more information about our national coaching program. And then there's some other cool offerings. The map is on there. There's a podcast. There's some research that's coming out. Feel free to check us out. But thank you all again to all the panelists, Tomei, our moderator, and thank you all for tuning in. I apologize for being 9 minutes over, but this was so rich and so good. I had to squeeze it in. But thank you so much, and shout out to all of the folks who submitted questions. Folks, take care, be well, and see you next time.